Amid tensions and frustration from both Israel and Hamas on the implementation of the ceasefire deal, including Israeli frustration at the poor condition of released hostages or the humiliating parading of Israeli coffins by Hamas, calls for the agreement to continue, with the first 6-week phase due to end on Saturday, even as indirect negotiations towards phase 2 have yet to begin.
The resumption of hostilities must be avoided at all cost. And I call on both sides to fully honour their commitments to the ceasefire deal and conclude negotiations for the second phase. And I commend the mediators Egypt, Qatar and the United States for their steadfast work in securing the first phase and pursuing the second phase.
Explained that her engagements in the region reaffirmed the view that there was no resolution to the current or wider conflict that was not fundamentally political. That Gaza should remain an integral part of a future Palestinian state, that Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, are unified, that there can be no long-term IDF presence in Gaza, but that Israeli security concerns must be addressed. And amid recovery efforts in Gaza, growing alarm at the spiralling situation in the West Bank.
I am concerned about military operations, attacks and mounting violence in the West Bank. Casualties, destruction and displacement continue to be reported, particularly in Jenin, Tubas and Tulkarem governorates, where refugee camps and infrastructure are heavily impacted. Many of these areas are in Area A under the Palestinian Authority's civil and security responsibility. Israeli forces have deployed airstrikes and other heavy weaponry, whilst Palestinian militants have used improvised explosive devices and carried out shooting attacks. This takes place alongside continued violence and intimidation by Israeli settlers against Palestinians and attacks by Palestinians against Israelis.
In a poignant moment, the Council also heard from this former Israeli hostage taken by Hamas from the Nova Music Festival, but later rescued from captivity in June last year after 245 days, while her boyfriend, Avinitan Or, continues to be among the 63 hostages still held.
That 24 of them are alive. Many of them send sight of life through released hostages. Our life cannot go without them. And that is why I need to make sure that the world knows that. The deal must go on, in full and completely, in all the stages. My partner, Avinatan Or, and many other hostages are only supposed to be released in the second stage of the deal. We are talking about innocent people detaken from this bed, from a dance party, from their simple life, into a pure hell. You must understand, every taken in captivity is dangerous.
Deserve security. Palestinians deserve security.
Political analyst offered a sobering assessment of the road ahead, including the imperative of the ceasefire and the Israeli hostage for Palestinian prisoner exchange continuing.
Reason to fear a resumption of those tragedies, and in particular a possible renewed attempt to permanently depopulate the north of Gaza. A number of the families of those being held still in Israel, those being held in Gaza, the families in Israel, including some who have been released, have taken to the squares and towns of Israel out of fear that the intention of their own government is not to see this through. 2, the premise for a full ceasefire must learn from history and be based on reality. Hamas non-governance in Gaza is achievable. The movement itself has said so. But no party to a conflict will negotiate its own dissolution unless it is destroyed on the battlefield or unless the root causes of the conflict are addressed.
A ceasefire, the UN Secretary General in January published a needs assessment for Gaza, noting that the war had caused damage estimated at around $49 billion, set back human development in the territory by almost 70 years, while the $53 billion recovery and reconstruction price tag will require at least $20 billion during the first 3 years. Securing that funding will be the next big challenge for the international community. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.